Alright, so Chipotle workers up at a location in Augusta, Maine were recently in the process of attempting to form the company's first union here in the United States, and so of course Chipotle decided that the only reasonable course of action that they could have in response to this was to completely shut the store location down. So here for More Perfect Union, they say breaking, Chipotle is permanently closing the store in Augusta, Maine, where workers last month filed to form Chipotle's first union in the US, and workers are rallying outside the store at 5 p.m. today, now 2 days ago, and demanding the company halt its union busting and reopen the store. So a couple of different things right off the bat. Number one, this should be technically considered to be illegal. Now obviously corporations like Chipotle are going to, as they did in this letter, give their various bullshit justifications for why they're shutting this location down, but as we get into more of the details here, I think you'll come to understand that this is very obviously a union busting tactic, and it's one that we've seen from plenty of corporations, even just once in the last couple of months. We had this from In These Times here. Starbucks union files labor complaint claiming that the store closures are retaliation. The coffee chain announced it's closing 16 stores, including some that have recently unionized, and workers say it's coercion against labor organizing, and it 100% is. It's a classic tactic, basically just supposed to be intimidating these workers for daring to have some sort of a democratic representation within their workplace as a pushback to the authoritarian structure of the capitalist system. But now I wanted to, before we get into more details in terms of Chipotle's explanations for why they're shutting this location down, I want to watch this little video here. Great video by More Perfect Union. They always do good stuff when it comes to union drives, but basically hearing directly from the workers themselves in terms of why they were trying to form this union in the first place. So let's go ahead and jump into this video.
When I walked back into that restaurant in January, after being gone for 2 years, I wanted to cry. It was an immediate, my heart just dropped. Nothing in that restaurant looked like it had been taken care of, including the crew.
I started noticing the issues in Chipotle pretty much right from the bat.
I started noticing issues pretty much day one. They kept insisting that we run with not quite the number of people that we should run with.
If there aren't enough people to run the store, we have to cut corners.
We have customers coming in and they're upset. Why are you so slow? Why is the food not right? The dangers of not being able to have enough people to run the store are a lot of shortcuts that are unsafe. We had people working injured.
I am interested in companies with magnificent sales and earnings, like Chipotle.
Melissa, Chipotle out with beats on the top and bottom lines for Q1. Same-store sales also up 9%.
Chipotle shares sizzled in early trading Wednesday, jumping more than 10% to a record high.
You know, look, I think our secret weapon is our people and our culture.
The short staffing has led to injuries and exhaustion in the crew.
When we're operating at half crew or even a third of the crew, a lot of the people have to work double time at extra jobs. We end up getting ourselves spread thin, like a candle burning at both ends. It burns out pretty fast.
Everyone was overworked, everyone was burnt out, and everyone was doing the job of at least 2 full people.
We had complained in all of the appropriate ways, and it was time for us to say, we can't keep doing this.
If we weren't going to meet the minimum mandatory amount of people in order to work the job properly and effectively, we weren't going to open up the shop at all.
We weren't troublemakers. We were just asking to be cared for better.
Most of it was just them walking in and asking us questions.
So far has been a lot of signing paperwork and acknowledging our responsibilities.
But no concrete promises were made.
We still don't have the right training. We just want to be able to function.
We're asking for the bare minimum that Chipotle itself should be providing to begin with. Training and staffing your own restaurant is pretty par for the course for any business.
It benefits us, but also it benefits Chipotle and the customers too. When we realized that we could all stand up together and say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. You can't, run us around like this anymore. They listened. They deployed. This is the power of being a collective.
This little tiny Chipotle in Maine managed to make national news, and hopefully what we did can inspire people from all walks of life and from all sorts of companies to know that if you don't feel like you're being treated right by your company, you can do stuff about it. You absolutely have a voice, you absolutely have power, and you should use it.
All right, so I mean, obviously the video that we just watched was made before Chipotle announced that they were going to be shutting down this store location, but still, you understand the basic demands that they were making. I mean, absolutely nothing crazy. They're talking about the bare fucking minimum of what it means to even operate any business whatsoever. They're talking about having adequate training so that people aren't getting injured on the job. They're talking about having adequate staffing so that people aren't having to work 2-3 jobs during their shifts and burning themselves out. I mean, literally just the bare fucking minimum in terms of dignity and respect and adequate reward for working the job that they are doing and providing the value for this very wealthy corporation that they are providing. So, you know, obviously nothing but solidarity with these workers. I hope that the, you know, charges that they're trying to bring against Chipotle in retaliation for them closing this store are successful, but I wanted to read a little bit more into the details of exactly what the bullshit justifications are that Chipotle is putting forward for why they're shutting this location, because it's just absolutely fucking mind-boggling, because the same reasons why they are saying they're closing this location down are the exact things that these workers were just complaining about in that video. So it's just absolutely wild circular logic here. But here from the New York Times, they say Chipotle closes a Maine store and workers say that it's because of a union drive. They say workers who filed for a union election at a Chipotle in Augusta, Maine are accusing the company of seeking to undermine their campaign by closing the restaurant. The company notified employees of the closing on Tuesday morning, just hours before the two sides were scheduled to take part in a hearing before the National Labor Relations Board about the possible election. Okay, so understand the timing here. I mean, you know, suspicious to say the least, but they have a quote here saying, "We have been unable to adequately staff this remote restaurant," said Lori Shallow, the company's chief corporate affairs officer. And she also said, because of these ongoing staffing challenges, there is no probability of reopening in the foreseeable future, so we've made the decision to permanently close the restaurant. So wait a second, you're saying you don't have the ability, possibly, to hire more people to work at this location while you're going around and you're spending $263 billion or $1 million on stock buybacks during just the first quarter of 2022, as your CEO is making 1,000% more than the average median worker. You somehow don't have the resources in order to hire people to work at this location. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. Those were the exact complaints and the reasoning behind why these workers were trying to form the union in the first place, and that's the same justification for why they're saying they're going to shut this location down. Complete bullshit. We know you have the resources in order to actually fix these problems. And again, as they showed in that video there, they immediately, when they heard a whiff of the possibility of a union forming at this location, they sent out all of these managers, they sent out these, higher ups at Chipotle to go to this location and basically make all these promises that they had absolutely no intention of keeping. And then just hours before they were going to have a mediation between the formation of this union and Chipotle corporate, they decided, no, it's just better for us to shut this location down. And I think you're gonna, get an idea of why they made that choice, given the absolutely insane reasoning that they were going to argue before the National Labor Relations Board in that meeting. But they continue here saying a lawyer representing the workers filed a charge with the Labor Board contending that the closing was an illegal act of retaliation. And he said, "I'm referring to this as union busting 101, said Jeffrey Neal Young, who frequently represents unions in the state. He said, "It's a classic response. Employees decide to organize and the employer says that it's closing the store." And they say the Labor Board will investigate the charge and issue a formal complaint if it finds merit in the accusation, at which point the case would go before an administrative law judge and the two sides could reach a settlement beforehand. But I mean, even understand this. Listen, the National Labor Relations Board and labor laws in general in this country have been absolutely gutted for decades. We do have a nominally more pro-worker National Labor Relations Board under President Joe Biden, but still the NLRB is dramatically underfunded, under-resourced, understaffed, etc. So still needs to be a lot of work on that. But even if they did end up finding merit in this accusation and then it went before an administrative law judge, and even if they won that case, still there's no guarantees that the consequences for Chipotle are going to be great enough in order to actually fix the situation here. But that's just a glimpse into how completely gutted our labor laws and protections for workers actually are right now in the United States and have been for years. But they continue saying a handful of workers at the store walked off the job in mid-June to protest what they said were unsafe conditions that stemmed from understaffing and insufficient training. And they say within a few days, the company closed the store to the public while it sought to improve staffing, including retaining 2 recruiting experts, according to Ms. Shallow. And during this time, workers continued to report to the store where they received some training and helped clean it, but often for fewer hours a week than they previously worked. And they say on June 22nd, workers filed a petition to hold a union election And the labor board requires at least 30% of workers to indicate their support before you're allowed to proceed with the election. And here's where it gets just absolutely laughably ridiculous. They say the hearing scheduled for Tuesday was meant to consider the arguments from the two sides about the proposed election. Chipotle had asserted in filings that the election should not go forward, partly because the store was understaffed, and so the workers eligible to vote would not be fully representative of its eventual workforce. Okay, you understand the absurdity of what the fuck they're saying right here in this statement? Okay, they're saying that workers were going on strike basically and trying to form a union because of understaffing problems, and Chipotle was going to go to this NLRB meeting and try to argue that those workers didn't have the right to have a union election, not even just form a union, but have a union election because of the understaffing problems. It's absolutely fucking wild that, you know, a company as wealthy as Chipotle wouldn't even be able to come up with better justifications than this. You're saying that they can't possibly represent 30% of the workforce in an election because of the understaffing problems that are your fucking fault because you're spending all of your goddamn money on stock buybacks? I mean, just completely fucking ridiculous. But I guess that's, you know, part of the reason why they were probably not going to go to this meeting with the NLRB and why they decided to shut this store location down literally hours before this meeting was going to take place, because they had no legitimate arguments that they were going to make in front of the National Labor Relations Board. So, you know, at the end of the day, hopefully these workers get what they're looking for. Hopefully the NLRB actually grows a pair and holds Chipotle fully accountable for this very obvious union busting activity that they're engaging in right now. But again, even so, even if they do win that case and it's brought before the judge and they win, there's no guarantee, because the consequences for corporations engaging in union busting is an absolute joke in this country. Okay, they have basically unilateral power, and this cuts back to what I think is a fundamental flaw in the capitalist system. Why I would call myself a socialist is because, you know, these workers were attempting to have some sort of a democratic check on the decision making of an inherently authoritarian structure of this capitalist enterprise in Chipotle. And so it gives you an insight into what the consequences are of allowing that authoritarian structure to continue, because they were just able to, on a complete fucking whim, shut down this store location, potentially ruin these workers' lives because they just decided it wasn't worth it for them to deal with this union, okay, or it wasn't worth it for them to adequately have the training and staffing in place to run the business. All right, so it cuts through straight to the point of why, you know, I would call myself an anti-capitalist, is because you have this authoritarian structure of this system in place where workers, average people, have absolutely no say whatsoever in their average day-to-day. They're frequently having to put themselves, their literal bodies on the line, in many cases facing injuries and you know, exhaustion because they're being overworked. And they have absolutely no ability to push back against that authoritarian system unless they have something like union representation, or, you know, in my, you know, absolute dream scenario, having full control and ownership over the means of production. But in this case, we're just talking about having a small democratic check on the authoritarian power of these capitalist enterprises. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is more of a lesson in terms of why we need more people forming unions around the United States, because look at how terrified these corporations are. I mean, we saw this with Starbucks, we saw this with Amazon, we saw this with now Chipotle. They will go to every length imaginable to prevent these unions from forming, because they understand fully well that the way that they make their money, the way that they give their dividends to their shareholders, the way that they pay their executives the absurd amounts of money that they are giving them, is by extracting surplus value off of the backs of average workers like we just watched in that video. They are beating them into the ground. They are treating them as cogs in a machine. They are treating them in completely inhumane ways, and they are willing to go to all of these different lengths, whether it's the, you know, a captured audience meeting that Amazon was deploying, the blatant anti-union propaganda that we saw at Starbucks, or whether it's just completely shutting down the store location in the case of this Chipotle store, or in the case of the Starbucks locations as well. They will do everything in their power to prevent average workers from having a voice in their workplace. Okay, so more of a lesson in terms of why we need more people forming unions, especially at a place like Chipotle that doesn't have union representation here in the United States. The more people you get unionized, the larger a collective fighting force that you have at your disposal in order to push back against this unchecked authoritarian power of these enterprises.